Two arrogant officers thought they were making a routine bust when they arrested her, but behind the calm eyes of the woman in handcuffs was a DEA agent who'd been hunting them for months. The stretch of Highway 82 just past Thomaston, Alabama, was long and empty, with nothing but pine trees on both sides and the occasional rusted mailbox leaning toward the road. It was just past 8 p.m., and the sky had that heavy orange glow that made everything look slightly blurred. Tasha Ellison, 38, was heading home to Jackson, Mississippi after a weekend medical conference in Montgomery. Her playlist was set to low jazz, her phone on Do Not Disturb. She'd driven this highway a dozen times. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. Her windows were up, her car was clean, her seatbelt on. So when flashing blue lights filled her rearview mirror, her first thought wasn't panic, just mild annoyance. She slowed, flicked her blinker, and pulled off onto the dirt shoulder. She rolled the window down, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. A tall officer approached, hand already resting on his holstered weapon. He didn't greet her. "License and registration." His voice was flat. No eye contact. Tasha handed them over without a word. He barely glanced at them before nodding to the back seat. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." "Where are you coming from?" "Medical conference. Montgomery." "What's in the trunk?" "Luggage. Work stuff." He tapped the roof of her car twice. "Pop it." Tasha's brow furrowed slightly. "Is there a reason?" "You got a problem?" "No," she replied calmly, reaching for the trunk release. He walked back, and moments later another officer, thicker build, goatee, mirrored sunglasses even in the evening, joined him. They spent a few minutes rummaging. Tasha kept her eyes on the side mirror. Something felt off. Not the stop itself. The energy. The silence between them. The way the second officer kept glancing up at her as if checking if she was watching. Then the first officer returned. "Step out of the vehicle." "Excuse me." "I said step out, now." Tasha complied. Her voice remained even. "Can you tell me what's going on? We found a controlled substance in your bag." "Cocaine." She blinked. "No, you didn't." The second officer, Officer Sharp, according to the badge barely visible under his vest, moved in behind her. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "I don't consent to this search," she said, louder now. "I'm not resisting, but you're making a mistake." The cuffs clicked around her wrists. "I have no record. I work in pharmaceuticals. You can call. We'll talk about that at the station." Officer Callan cut in, walking her toward the squad car. "You can explain it to the judge." They shoved her into the back without another word. Her breath came shallow now, but she didn't fight it. Not yet. Inside, her mind was running through every possibility. Her real eye was hidden beneath the lining of her suitcase. Her burner phone, encrypted, was in her glove compartment, but she hadn't used either since Thursday. She stared through the cage of the patrol car, not moving, not blinking. Callan made a joke to Sharp about another one trying to play innocent. They laughed, but they didn't know who they were messing with. What they didn't realize was Tasha wasn't just another woman on the road. She was tracking men exactly like them. The booking area smelled like bleach and fried food. Tasha sat quietly on a bench bolted to the wall, wrists still cuffed, her blazer wrinkled, her expression blank. She'd given her name, date of birth, and nothing more. Every answer was short but polite. They had no idea she was mentally documenting every second. The deputies took their time processing her. One asked what kind of name Ellison was. Another asked if she had any tattoos. She didn't answer either. They took her mugshot without speaking, fingerprinted her with heavy hands, and passed her clothes off to a female guard for the mandatory strip search. In the cold, tiled room, Tasha stood with arms lifted as the guard checked her for contraband. It wasn't the first time this had happened, not by a long shot, but the part that still burned, always, was how routine it felt for the people doing it, as if dignity wasn't something to consider anymore. "Squat," the woman said flatly. Tasha did. Not a single muscle on her face moved. When they handed her the jail uniform, a faded orange two-piece that hung loose at the waist, she put it on slowly, then sat back down in the holding area with 6 other women. One of them, a girl no older than 20, kept glancing at her. "You knew?" the girl asked. Tasha gave her a brief nod. "Just passing through." The girl smirked. "Aren't we all?" Time moved strangely inside. Tasha counted the minutes by the flickering of the overhead light, by the sound of gum smacking from the bored receptionist, by the mechanical groan of vending machines that never worked. But the gears in her head didn't stop turning. Her handler, Roy Talbot, wasn't expecting to hear from her until Monday morning. She was scheduled to report back with findings from the conference, findings which were actually cover for a meeting with a mid-level informant about law enforcement infiltration in smaller southern counties. She hadn't told Roy she was taking Highway 82, hadn't felt the need. Now, she regretted it. She scanned the corner of the cell for a camera. It was there, tucked beneath a black dome, partially obstructed. That could help. She memorized every angle of the room, every name badge, every piece of paperwork that passed within her view. Around midnight, a deputy came to escort her to a one-on-one interview. They called it an initial appearance, but there was no judge. Just a desk, a metal chair, and a man who introduced himself as her court-appointed defense attorney. "Name's Ben Ridley. You can call me Ben. Look, I won't lie to you. These are serious charges. Possession with intent to distribute carries weight in this county, especially considering—" He trailed off, glancing at her, clearly unsure how far to go. "Considering what?" she asked evenly. He shrugged. "You're not exactly local. The judge tomorrow. Real old school. He's not going to like being woken up early just for you. I'll do my best, but it's going to come down to what they say you had in your possession." "They say they found cocaine," Tasha replied. "Yeah, bagged and labeled. I didn't have any drugs. I've never used." Ben scratched his beard. "Well, I'm not saying you did, but if it was in your suitcase—" "It wasn't. Then we'll fight it." Tasha stared at him for a second. There was no confidence behind his words, no plan, no curiosity. Just the kind of resignation that comes from working too many cases that go the same way. Back in the cell, she sat again. One of the guards walked by and looked in. He whispered something to the other deputy and chuckled. She didn't flinch. They had no idea who she really was. That made her dangerous. That made her patient. She wasn't just waiting to be released. She was waiting for them to make their next mistake. The next morning, the jail was louder. Someone down the hallway was yelling about a phone call. The girl from the holding cell was gone. Breakfast came in the form of cold grits and a plastic spoon. Tasha didn't eat. She'd slept maybe 90 minutes, but her mind was sharp. 2 guards came in around 8 a.m., both with that same half-bored swagger that made her stomach turn. "Ellison!" one of them barked. "On your feet!" She stood, hands behind her back again, this time less gently than before. They walked her past a hallway lined with barred cells and into a smaller room, where officers Callan and Sharp waited. This wasn't procedure. No lawyer, no paperwork, no court officer. Just them. "You remember me?" Sharp asked, arms folded. Tasha stared at him. Callan smirked and leaned against the desk. "We had a little more time to search your stuff last night. Guess what we found?" She said nothing. "A second phone," he said, holding up her encrypted burner. "You gonna tell us what this is for?" "That's personal property. You have no warrant," he chuckled. "You're not exactly in a position to throw around legal terms. You're the one caught with half an ounce of coke." Tasha kept her voice measured. "You planted that." Sharp's face twitched just slightly. Callan, though, kept the grin. "You're lucky we didn't charge you with obstruction. Or resisting." "I didn't resist." "You didn't smile either," Callan said with a wink. Then Sharp took a slow step forward. "You got an attitude. You think you're smarter than us." Tasha tilted her head. "I know I am." Sharp moved like he might reach for her, but Callan lifted a hand. "Not here." The room went quiet for a beat. "Let me guess," she said slowly, eyes moving between them. "You two work overtime. Always the last to sign off a shift. Seize just enough drugs to report, keep the rest for favors, resell or silence. You stop drivers you don't recognize looking for the next stash." Neither officer spoke. "You weren't expecting someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Callan asked, mocking. Tasha leaned in just slightly. Someone who knows the chain of custody. Someone who knows your precinct already has 3 red flags from internal affairs. Someone whose real name and real job would get you both buried under paperwork and federal charges. The room tensed. Callan lost the smile. "You got a mouth," Sharp muttered. Tasha locked eyes with him. "You got a badge you don't deserve." Callan stepped forward now. "Careful. You want us to add threats to your list? You already lied once. Why not keep going?" He stared at her. Then, without a word, he turned to Sharp and handed over the phone. "Put this in the box for now. She's going to court in an hour." As they walked her back to holding, Tasha caught a glimpse of another officer walking by. His name tag read Reyes. Younger. Watching everything. He didn't say a word, but she saw the flicker of doubt in his face. That was the first crack. Back in the cell, she sat again, ignoring the tray of lukewarm oatmeal left on the bench. Her thoughts were racing now. Callan and Sharp weren't just dirty. They were sloppy. Arrogant. They thought they were untouchable, but now she had faces, patterns, and behavior. They'd exposed themselves. The burner phone was never used. There was no way to unlock it without her thumbprint and a sequence only she and Roy Talbot knew. That meant it would buy her time. They were building a fake narrative, but she wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. The deeper they dug, the worse it would be. For them. 5 years earlier, Tasha Ellison sat in a cafe off Beale Street in Memphis, sipping weak coffee and pretending to read a travel magazine. She wasn't there for the jazz or the food. She was watching a man named Derek Vaughan, former corrections officer, now suspected supplier for a drug ring moving meth out of West Tennessee. Her name wasn't Tasha that day. It was Latrice Monroe. And she wasn't a pharmaceutical consultant. She was a college dropout with 3 sealed arrests and a boyfriend doing time at Parchman. That was the character she played. And she played it well. DEA work was rarely about guns or dramatic busts. It was about silence, listening, watching, being patient when others rushed. That's what made her good. By the time she was 30, she'd built a reputation installs the agency as a ghost, someone who could go invisible in plain sight. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She looked like the kind of woman who folded laundry during reality TV marathons. That's why she was valuable. Her current assignment had started just under a year ago. A quiet red flag had been raised about drug evidence disappearing in certain rural counties. Cases where arrests were made, but prosecutions vanished. Files went missing, property never returned. The patterns were subtle, but consistent. Talbot, her handler, called her in over breakfast tacos. "I need someone who doesn't look like a federal agent," he'd said. "You mean a black woman in heels?" she replied, raising an eyebrow. "I mean someone who scares them by not being scared." She'd moved quickly after that. Set up a shell identity, a pharmaceutical consultant with a reason to travel often across southern states, who sometimes drove instead of flying. Nothing flashy, just someone who might look like she had access to pills. Enough to raise suspicion, enough to draw interest. Tasha had already built contact with 2 key informants, a former field officer in Marengo County and a pharmacy tech from Starkville who'd been fired under strange circumstances. Their stories painted the same picture, small-town deputies with too much power, dipping into evidence lockers and making backdoor deals. She hadn't expected to land this close to the operation this fast, but when Callan and Sharp pulled her over, she'd recognized Callan's name immediately. It had come up twice in sealed reports she wasn't supposed to see. Now, they'd walked right into her case file. Sitting in the holding cell again, she leaned her head back against the concrete wall. Her eyes closed, just for a second. She thought of her father, retired firefighter. He used to say, "Never yell when you can whisper and still be heard." She'd built her whole career around that idea, and now she was trapped in a small-town jail where the good old boys thought she was easy prey. They had no idea they'd just given her everything she needed. She had names. She had behavior. She had access to their body cam footage. If it hadn't been mysteriously turned off, that alone would raise red flags. But she needed to stall until Talbot found her. He would. He always did. She'd missed the Monday check-in window. That alone would send up a flare. She just had to wait a little longer and let them keep digging their own grave. The courtroom was smaller than Tasha expected. Plain walls, faded portraits, ceiling fans that squeaked every few rotations. There were no reporters, no audience, just a few bored clerks, a sleepy bailiff, and Judge Ronald Beckwith, who looked like he'd been pulled out of bed 10 minutes earlier and hadn't forgiven anyone for it. Tasha was led in through a side door, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wearing the same baggy orange uniform. The chains clinked as she walked. Every sound echoed. She sat beside Ben Ridley, the overworked public defender who still hadn't made eye contact with her that morning. Across the room, Officers Callan and Sharp stood stiff and smug, both in pressed uniforms. Sharp gave her a smirk. Callan adjusted his collar like he was preparing for a wedding toast. Judge Beckwith cleared his throat. "Let's get on with it. Charges read?" The clerk rattled off the list. Possession with intent to distribute. Suspicious electronic devices. Refusal to cooperate. Tasha kept her face still. Inside, her jaw tightened. None of it was real. But it was neat. Clean. Fabricated with just enough truth to sound possible. Callan took the stand first. Pulled the vehicle over for suspicious behavior. Vehicle made a sudden lane shift, no signal. Driver appeared evasive when questioned. Asked her to step out. Discovered a large quantity of suspected narcotics in the trunk, wrapped and concealed. "Any resistance?" Beckwith asked. Callan shook his head. Minimal. She tried to argue. Claimed she didn't know what it was. "And did she give any reasonable explanation for the second phone?" "No, sir. Said it was private." Ben Ridley scribbled something on his legal pad that looked more like a doodle than a note. "Thank you, Officer Callan," the judge said. Sharp followed. His voice was smooth, but Tasha picked up on the rehearsed rhythm of it. He kept his eyes forward, never looked at her. That was telling. Even liars sometimes had lines they wouldn't cross with eye contact. He testified that the substance tested positive, that the phone was encrypted beyond what any normal civilian would use, that she'd refused to identify her employer. Beckwith nodded. "Appears we have a textbook drug courier. Bail is denied. She'll be remanded until—" "Your Honor." The interruption came from the rear of the courtroom. Everyone turned. A man in a charcoal suit, grey at the temples, walked through the doors holding a black leather folder. His tone was calm, but unmistakable. "My name is Special Agent Roy Talbot, DEA. I need to speak with you in chambers. Now." The judge squinted. "Excuse me?" Talbot moved forward, handed him a document. "That's a sealed federal file. You'll want to look at it, off the record." Callan shifted. Sharp blinked. Ben Ridley finally turned to Tasha, eyes wide now. The judge read through the first few pages, then slowly looked up. "Court is in recess. 5 minutes, everyone out, except Agent Talbot and Ms. Ellison." Tasha stood. The bailiff unshackled her without a word. She walked beside Talbot toward the judge's chambers, the entire room now dead silent. Behind her, Sharp whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Callan didn't answer. Whatever sense of control they thought they had, it just walked out the door in a charcoal suit. Inside Judge Beckwith's chambers, the air felt heavier. The blinds were drawn, the wood-panelled walls dim under the old lamp near his desk. Tasha stood beside Roy Talbot, who had already unzipped his folder and spread out a half-inch stack of documents across the judge's table. Talbot wasted no time. "Your Honor, what you have in front of you is a signed clearance from the Department of Justice, 2 sealed warrants issued out of the Middle District of Alabama, and a full briefing on Operation Greycut." The judge flipped through the paperwork, frowning deeper with every page. "Ms. Ellison," Talbot continued, "is not a courier. She is a federally embedded DEA agent who's been undercover for the past 11 months investigating internal corruption linked to narcotics theft within regional law enforcement." Judge Beckwith leaned back in his chair, still holding one of the forms. "These are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Talbot said. "They're confirmed." He slid over a flash drive. "Bodycam footage from last night. We pulled it from precinct storage. What you'll see, assuming the files haven't been scrubbed yet, is Officer Callan handing off a bag from his own pocket, and Sharp referencing a burner phone before it was even discovered in Ms. Ellison's vehicle. That footage, combined with GPS logs and communication intercepts we've already collected, points to a deliberate frame job. The judge remained quiet, turning pages, breathing slower now. Tasha finally spoke. Your Honor, I've been following these officers since March. They have a pattern. They pick travelers with low likelihood of contesting charges. Mostly women. Mostly alone. Evidence disappears or gets manufactured. And until last night, we didn't have direct footage. Now we do. Beckwith ran a hand down his face. I've been on this bench for 22 years, he said, voice low. I don't like being made a fool of. You weren't the only one. Talbot said, tapping the folder. They've been feeding you cases they rigged. And I get it. You trusted them. But this is rot. It's been growing in plain sight. What do you want from me? Dismiss the charges, Talbot said. Now, then hold Callan and Sharp in this courthouse while we file the arrest orders. We'll be transferring jurisdiction to federal court within the hour. The judge nodded slowly, then stood. Back in the courtroom, the door creaked open and Beckwith returned to the bench. Tasha and Talbot followed. Callan and Sharp stood with their arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. Ridley stayed seated, Nkutu, now completely silent. Judge Beckwith didn't even look at them. After reviewing new evidence submitted by federal authorities, all charges against Ms. Ellison are hereby dismissed, effective immediately. Callan's head jerked. Sharp took a step forward. Wait, what? You two will remain in this courthouse under supervision. The judge interrupted, voice flat. Until instructed otherwise. I don't think you understand, Callan said, voice rising. She had coke in the— Enough! Beckwith's gavel hit the block. Court is adjourned. The silence that followed felt sharp. Tasha didn't look at either man as she walked past them. Talbot followed, speaking softly. We're pulling data off their precinct server. We've already subpoenaed their text records. If half of what's in there matches what our informants said, they're done. As they reached the hallway, Talbot slowed. Glad you kept your cool, he said. Tasha didn't answer right away. She looked down at the loose cuffs hanging from her wrist, then at the door they'd just exited. They thought I was just another woman with the wrong car and the wrong story, and now they're just two men with the wrong job and the wrong future, he said. But Tasha wasn't thinking about them anymore. Her mind was already on what came next. By the time Tasha and Talbot stepped outside, the sun had shifted high over the trees, casting sharp shadows on the courthouse steps. 2 federal agents were already waiting by an unmarked black SUV. One of them handed Talbot a file. Pulled the precinct logs, just like you asked, the agent said. You were right. Officer Callan's keycard accessed the evidence room 7 times last month, twice on days he wasn't scheduled to work. Tasha took the file and flipped through the timestamps, matching them against the case notes she'd been building for months. Sharp's name appeared too, tied to a confiscated stash from a bust near Meridian. The drugs had been marked for destruction. They were never logged as destroyed. They built a system, she muttered. Used the uniform like a pass to steal and resell. Covered their tracks with small arrests, planted evidence, pressured the accused into plea deals. Talbot nodded. It's not just them. They're part of something larger. We've got reports coming out of Choctaw and Lowndes counties too. Same patterns, same silence. Inside the courthouse, Sharp and Callan were being questioned separately. One of the federal agents standing by had already slipped into an adjacent room with a tablet, syncing Callan's body cam files to a forensic laptop. Tasha had no doubt what they'd find. Back in the car, she pulled out her encrypted burner from a sealed evidence bag. Still locked, still untouched. They tried to plant it like it was a smoking gun, she said. Didn't even realize what it really was. Talbot looked over. You want to be the one to call it in? She shook her head. Not yet. I want to go through it myself first. Clean, careful. He understood. This was personal now. They drove down to a secure field office just outside of Demopolis, where a small team had been gathering information from locals for the past 3 weeks. There, behind a thick steel door and 2 layers of security, Tasha finally sat down at a real desk. The walls were lined with charts, dates, names, booking photos. At the center, a corkboard with thin red lines connecting officers to dealers, and dealers to property seizures that had vanished without a trace. Her name wasn't on the board. That's how she preferred it. Talbot watched as she reviewed digital files, marked locations, and matched suspect movement with old GPS pings. She cross-referenced phone logs from Callan's personal device, courtesy of a subpoena granted only an hour ago, and found a dozen calls to a man she knew as Elijah Burks. Street name? Ghost. A supplier with known contacts in Mobile and Pensacola. There it was. A link between Callan and the trafficking chain. Not just theft, not just intimidation, but actual product movement. Across state lines. A federal crime. He's cooked, Talbot said. He cooked himself, Tasha replied. A junior analyst walked in with 2 folders. Preliminary testimony from one of the women they arrested last month. Her story matches. Same tactics, threats, forced search, no warrant. Tasha took the folder and exhaled slowly. They weren't just abusing power, she said. They were using it as cover. And they would have kept going if I hadn't gotten pulled over. Talbot folded his arms. They messed with the wrong woman. She gave a slight nod, then looked down at her notes. I don't want them just prosecuted. I want every case they touched reopened. Every person they silenced deserves better. He didn't argue. Outside, the sun was dropping low now, throwing gold over the parking lot. Tasha stood by the door and looked out at the horizon for a long time. This wasn't just about Callan and Sharp anymore. It never really was. Because when power's abused long enough, silence stops being an option, and someone always fights back. 3 weeks later, Tasha Ellison stood outside the same courthouse where she'd once been paraded in chains. No cuffs this time, no orange jumpsuit, just a simple navy suit and a quiet, steady gaze. She wasn't there to testify. That part was done. Callan and Sharp had been officially indicted on multiple federal charges: evidence tampering, civil rights violations, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom had been packed that day. Reporters, families, lawyers with too many files in hand and not enough time to process them. Now those 2 men sat in separate cells in 2 different facilities. Isolated. Power stripped. The press was calling them dirty cops. But to Tasha, that term always felt too easy, too clean. What they did had weight. It ruined lives. Some of those lives were still sitting behind bars because they didn't have the benefit of a federal badge hidden in their suitcase. Outside the courthouse, a group of high school students waited for their civics field trip to begin. A young black girl, maybe 15, maybe 16, noticed Tasha as she passed. She whispered something to her friend, who turned to look too. Tasha didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just met the girl's gaze, held it, and gave a nod. A real one. From someone who'd been through the fire and came out clearer, not colder. Back in Jackson, she finally returned to her own apartment. The lights were still on timers. Her plants were somehow alive. The suitcase she'd been carrying that night sat in her hallway, untouched. She opened it slowly and found the blazer she wore during the arrest, still folded over the edge. She pulled it out, ran her hand over the sleeve, and then tossed it into a bin marked evidence. Not for court, for herself. She made a call to Talbot the next morning. I'm taking 2 weeks, she said. You've earned 6. I'll settle for 2. Then I'm back in. He didn't argue. Tasha didn't take time off because she needed rest. She took it because the work would still be there, and she needed to look at it with clear eyes. No emotion, just facts. But the truth lingered. She'd almost been erased. 1 stop, 2 crooked badges, a planted bag, and that could have been the end. No trial, no headlines. Just another woman in the system no one questioned, no one believed. That reality stayed with her. She spent a day visiting 3 of the women whose charges had been dropped since her case broke open. One of them, a mother of 4, cried for nearly 10 minutes before she could say thank you. Another had spent 9 months in a state facility, on charges that were now proven false. Tasha handed her a sealed envelope, contacts for legal help, housing assistance, someone to walk with her into the next chapter. That's what justice was. Not just courtrooms and verdicts, but making people whole again, even when they'd been shattered by people wearing the wrong uniform. Later that night, she sat on her back porch, a mug of tea in hand, her eyes scanning the street for no reason at all. Her neighborhood was quiet. Not silent, just calm. A voice played in her head, her father's again. People will size you up before you open your mouth, but when they find out who you really are, make sure it humbles them. That was the lesson. Not revenge, not outrage, just truth. Cold, clear, and necessary. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not anymore. The truth had already done that for her. Because power only intimidates when you don't know your own. And sometimes the strongest weapon you have is patience. If you're watching this, remember, don't assume. Don't back down. And if someone tries to write your story for you, grab the pen and finish it yourself. Subscribe for more stories like this, because some truths need to be told out loud.